bit of a sprint in there, as we said.
Yes.
Now, John, you wrote a production diary for The Road. At the end of that production diary, it was a few years ago, obviously, you lamented the passing of The Promised Land, which was this movie. Now, can you talk us through how The Promised Land became Lawless and how the project got revived?
Yeah, it was actually it was originally Wettest County, based on the novel Wettest County in the World. That, in case people are wondering what happened to the title, the distributors around the world didn't understand it. The idea of wet and dry is particularly in France, not understood in those terms. So we were looking at finding a simpler, deliberately more generic title, rather than 100 different titles around the world. But that's a little digression about the title. The film in 2008 coincided with the global economic downturn, and the studios in America just said it was a Sony film with a whole different lineup of cast, and Sony said we can't make these films anymore. And sadly, it's almost still true of the big studios. So we had to go back to the drawing board, and years later we finally pieced it together, a whole new cast, and different financiers. This was Megan Ellison's first picture of Annapurna's. And I don't know if you're aware, she's probably a 25-year-old financier who's filled in the gap with a lot of filmmakers like myself in America, thankfully.
Good person to know. Absolutely. You said a brand new cast. Was Shia LaBeouf a constant?
Yes, Shia, I know Shia gets a bit of a hard time out there, but he was the first one on, wouldn't let go of it, and helped get it reincarnated. So yeah, he's kind of a partner in it.
But the other two cast members, correct me if I'm wrong, were Ryan Gosling and Michael Shannon back in 2008, 2009.
Correct, yeah.
Now back then you couldn't get a film funded with those two guys. These days, you'd be okay, I imagine.
Yeah, we had Amy Adams, Scarlett Johansson, Paul Dano, Ryan. It's still, and bizarrely, even, this is how bad it was. We couldn't even get a single US distributor without paying any, like we were offering it for nothing, just for P&A, and no one would take it. So, and I think the key there was, with that lineup, there was a feeling that two things. There was no audience for a period film, and no audience for any kind of rural setting. I had offers on the table to make it if we reset it in a city. And it's a simple, I started to try and analyze that, and I realized it's just that classic thing of familiar, what's more familiar. The Capones in the city, Broadwalk Empire in Atlantic City. It's that whole whatever's familiar. And I guess the rural crime scene of that period hasn't been done since Bonnie and Clyde, which is a long time ago.
Was that the chief appeal though? Because I read somewhere that you were looking specifically for a gangster movie to do regardless of the subject matter.
But I didn't want to do another Capone story, and I was looking at contemporary gangster films, and again, for me, Goodfellas and Sopranos is kind of the final word on the mafia. So I was actually hunting for something different, and also I was looking after The Road. I was desperate to do something that tonally had more range, both in color, emotions, humor, romance, all those things. Deliberately, I kind of was itching to find a different Now, I love for me, that father and son love story is still very dear to me, but it was a hard film to make, and but sorry, bear with me, I'm jet lagged. What was the original question?
The original question was sort of about your desire to make a gangster film.
Yes, that was a long digression, but yes, it was the fact that it was a different world. It was the people that created the Capones, the people behind the scenes.
Let's throw it over to you guys now. We're going to have a couple of roving microphones running around, so Anwar, I'll start with you in the front row.
Yeah, John, you mentioned that Shia was a constant, but when it comes to casting the other brothers around him, how do you have to balance the casting of the right actor, but also actors with chemistry together so that they could seem like brothers even when they appear to be falling out? And as a sort of supplementary, unrelated to that, I noticed in the end credits, thank you for Terrence Malick.
Yes, well, Terrence Malick, he was, I had when we were trying to find a new title for the film, I knew someone in Australia called Peter Lawless, who lived up to his name. Anyway, that's another long story. But I found out that Malick had a film called Lawless, so he was extremely generous and gave us the title. He's been very supportive of my work, so I think he was understood my situation and was very generous. With the casting, it's always a tricky balance to get the cast. I mean, what I saw in Shia is he couldn't sit still. He was incredibly ambitious and had this youthful energy to him, and actually very much like the characters on screen, he admires actors like Tom Hardy and worships people like Gary Oldman and Guy Pearce, so much so that on set when Guy was filming, Shia would roll up every day just to watch. So it was that kind of eagerness and youthfulness that suited that character, and then he actually got in touch with Tom independently, being a huge fan of Bronson, and I coincidentally had met Tom when he was promoting Inception. He'd just done Inception, and so it was. I mean, to get from. I had a similar situation with The Proposition, with brothers, very different sorts of, like Danny Houston and Guy Pearce couldn't physically look more different. But I realized with my own brother, we look like opposites, but the thing that draws us together is the voice. So I thought if they spoke with a similar voice, then, which is, I know, difficult to understand, apologies about that, then it might, and there were three very different energies we were after, Forrest being a much more distilled, explosive quality, and Jason, who's very extroverted and sloppy and messy, and
Did you have to go on brothers' chemistry training? Did they spend much time in rehearsal, the three of them?
There was that whole thing. I mean, Shia and Dane DeHaan, because Dane, who plays cricket, was like another part of this dysfunctional family. So they went on a road trip together, and Jason disappeared with the Bondurant family in Virginia for quite some time. Tom is remarkable. He did his approach greatly unsettled me, and I have to be honest, we were all anxious about what Tom was doing, and I realized, his choices were incredibly audacious, but I have enormous respect for him and think he's one of the bravest actors out there. And I'll just explain briefly on that he, in rehearsals, he announced that Forrest, his approach was he was an old lesbian, and that like Tweety, the grandmother in Tweety Pie and Sweetie Bird, that, in other words, actually what he was talking about, I realised, is that Forrest was like the matriarch of the family, and he, hence the cardigan, and he wanted scenes of darning socks, and really he was, what he was getting at is that this guy couldn't articulate his feelings, but had enormous love and very, like a mother hen was protecting his nest.
Yes, please.
John, the violence in the film is very impactful when it comes and very realistic, and the two interlocking sequences that really made me squirm were the sequence with Forrest in the car when he comes to them, and then the revenge sequence on the two out-of-town guys. And it seems that the Bondurants were capable of taking violence to extremes. There's almost a touch, well, there's more than a touch of psychosis there. But yet you seem to underplay it, because at the same time these are just regular guys, they're just ordinary people living in the boonies who are trying to protect who they are and what they are. But the idea of, most people have had a fight in their lives, but not many of us cut people's bollocks off, and are happy to do so in the film. So I wonder whether the realism of that comes from the book and is historically accurate, whether it was something that you upped for the movie, because it's staggeringly well done and very, very unsettling.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that's the unsettling was the key. It is true. It is based. I mean, Matt Bondurant obviously embellished dialogue and every step. Obviously, when you dramatize in a book a real story, there's licenses taken. Likewise, when you adapt a book into a film. So there's all of that, but in terms of those events, they were all true. And what I think, what fascinated me about these guys is, and a lot of these people, and I've met a lot of these people as well, you know, my first film was about high security prison, and I spent years researching violent crime and behavior, and I take it very seriously. So these, what's interesting about these guys is often they get a sense of the stakes are so high, it is so extreme, they develop a sense of feeling like they are immortal, you know, because they survive so much, and it's almost like they're flirting and trying with death and beating death, and it's that, and these brothers really did get a reputation as being, you know, invincible, and as we know, no one is invincible, and everyone's mortal. And for me, two things that Nick and I loved about the ending of the book and this real story is that these guys, traditionally in gangster films, when we go on this roller coaster ride with these sorts of characters, they go down in a blaze of bullets, which these brothers did, but they never get up again. And that's a moral thing that I think traditionally plays out in gangster films, so we can feel good about walking away. And what happened in reality is when that line between the law is blurred and corruption sets in and people make up their own laws, in this case the Bondurants actually survived and went on to have families and businesses, and like a lot of these people actually do. Shia, I know there's, I mean, the intention of Shia he kind of idolized and wanted to have that power and the fear, controlling the fear and have that threat. And he never could, and his character, even though he was pushed to that extreme on the bridge, we did want him to play it where he was looking very kind of unsettled and shaken in a way that the brothers, never were. They were very shockingly efficient and could sleep at night, whereas the intention of Shia's arc is that he is pushed to that extreme and doesn't feel comfortable and finds his comfort zone back with his family and realizing he was more of a businessman. He was not like his brothers, much as he wanted to be like his brothers. It's I don't know if I'm answering the question. The psychosis, yeah. Well, I mean, it's. I think Forrest particularly was always haunted by the violence. Howard drank insanely, and these guys, Forrest really did think he was invincible, and never could form never had a family. His beautiful relationship with Maggie, who was equally damaged. They, secretly got married, and I think perhaps it's sort of poetic justice that he kind of went out of the world by slipping and falling in a puddle, and as opposed to a blaze of bullets.
Was Jack always a way into the story for you in terms of being the audience's point of view, essentially?
Well, I love ensembles, so I was always, for me, it's a balancing act. I try to, even though and it was very difficult for in these genres, the Western and the gangster film, to find roles for women, and the true story of Maggie and Bertha, we really cherished, and so I wanted to try and get a balance in there, with Forrest and Maggie. Really, for us, it was about Forrest and Maggie and Jack and Bertha, and then the others sort of fitting in around that.
You said that you struggled to get this made originally as a period piece, and yet this era and subject matter grips audiences. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think history has a habit of repeating itself, and there's, there has been there's economic unrest, there's the war on drugs is still an epic failure in the way that Prohibition was an epic failure. There's enormous greed and corruption. I think, there are these parallels. The difference is the Great Depression, when was that. Sorry to digress, but Roosevelt, a lot of those bankers went behind bars. No one has been accountable on this kind of epic kind of pillaging of money across the world. So I think people share a frustration about those kinds of inequalities. The divide between rich and poor is the exact same as 1920, which was the tail end of the Industrial Revolution. So there's been these huge, cyclical changes. I mean, obviously there's many differences, as well. So we were, I think also gangster films and Westerns, but gangster films certainly, every generation has its gangster story, and I think they're all interconnected. That's what I love about genre.
Oh, indeed. Any more questions for John from the Emperor's of Chapman in the second row, then the third row, and back to Anwar.
Hi. Can you, the Nick Cave, when did he come on board? Was he there right at the start? And obviously, I guess this was a story that appealed to him, but there was also the kind of musical potential. Perhaps you could talk a bit about the music and how much of his and how much was sort of...
Well, I mean, I'm very lucky because to have someone, script, it begins with the script and it ends with the music, and to have the one person do both is a rare treat. Nick, we talk about the music at a script stage. He loved the book, and he'd never adapted a book before, so it was something new. But we both share a love of this part of American history and culture, and the music in particular, blues and country, and out of that sprung all sorts of musical genres. So we also were keen to utilize song as part of the storytelling narrative, not just have to have a narrative that was reflected in song. So the songs were meant to comment on the story. The obvious example is White Light, White Heat. In terms of the earlier question, that song was also an attempt to make that point of White Light, White Heat was written by Lou Reed about another substance and another time, but when Ralph Stanley sings it suddenly sounds like it's about moonshine. The idea was to get the kind of iconic voices of country, Emmylou Harris and Ralph Stanley and Willie Nelson, to do and have Nick and his collaborator Warren Ellis do their own kind of country punk. My biggest regret on this whole project is not filming the conversations that went on in the recording studio between Nick and Warren and Ralph Stanley, because that was just because it was like two different languages. Ralph hated what Nick did and refused to play to it, so he did his own version, which you heard at the end of the film, and it worked out brilliantly. I mean, Ralph's, but it was, he couldn't do, it was a different key and a different structure. Anyway, but so it was very intermeshed, is the answer, from writing through to the music.
Was it a conversation or an argument? It sounds probably more like...
Well, actually, Ralph had didn't speak to Nick and Warren directly. He had his long-term guitarist be the translator. And
Actually, I don't think
oh yeah, no, it was quite extraordinary. And Ralph didn't do 4/4. Ralph didn't do the chord C. Anyway, so Ralph just did it freeform, his own style, which actually we should have just embraced from the get-go. We were trying to fit a square peg around all.
It was a gentleman, yes, please.
Round peg in the square. That's better.
Hi John, I love the film, it's great. But I have to be honest with you, I had a slight problem with one of the scenes. It's an absolutely brilliant scene where Guy Pearce speeds up Shia. It's bone-crunchingly realistic, fantastic. But then the next scene, or whenever it is, it's obviously quite soon. It's not like, months or weeks later. Forrest goes into the bar and he sees Shia, and for me, I had a problem with it didn't stick to the internal logic of the whole the film for me. I kind of lost my suspension of disbelief because Shia looked, I've actually been badly beaten up in the past, unfortunately, and survived. And I looked like I'd come out of a car crash. With this scene with Shia, he looked like he'd been slapped around a couple of times by his girlfriend. It just wasn't, the way he was kind of beaten up in the film, in that film outside the house. I was thinking, my God, he's going to look, terrible. And I'm wondering why, was that, what were the reasons for that? Was that Shia sort of going, well, I don't want to look like a mess, or because Forrest would have then had to have been so angry that he would have had to have then gone and killed Guy straight away, or what was the deal? What about the historical aspects of that?
Well, that was really just the editing. There was meant to be, sometimes when you cut from scene to scene, time passes, and that was the idea. So I'm sorry you missed that. But so that was days later, and many days later, and what can I say? The makeup wasn't enough.
I really liked the film. Don't get me wrong, but
he's got his eyes still busted, blood, jet red, and cheeks swollen. And I don't know if you noticed the swelling and all that.
Yeah.
But and I've been beaten up myself, a victim of violence. But we did try and show that, and same with the, when it comes to brass knuckles, how quickly people go down, the throat cut, the hospital, being in hospital, and then so I try to show the aftermath. I think a lot of films are, the punch-ups and the number of bullet holes that go through people. I try to show that aftermath, so I'm sorry about that.
No, I love the film.
It was, the intention was that time had passed.
It felt and looked painful, I have to say. But I wonder if we've got time for one last question. Let's go back to the front row here. Yes, you may have your microphone.
Well, it's an extension of the violence question, and I could probably have asked this about the proposition too. It amuses me that the key creatives to these exotically set and often quite violent stories live in Brighton, and I've got this image of you two having a script meeting in some seafront tea room. Is the contrast between the gentility of the place where you create the stories and the stories themselves, does that add to the creativity?
We've, I think I love Brighton. I actually live in LA now, the mean streets of LA. But I like to be unflinching about violence, and I take it very seriously. But having been a victim of violence and seeing violence, I grew up with violence. Hamilton, a big steel city in the 70s, and with gangs, and getting the tail end of the 60s made a big impression on me. I was very young, but every major leader from civil rights to the president was literally violently assassinated and publicly. So it was quite an upheaval that really affected me, and I think our society we're all capable of violence given the right circumstances, or the wrong circumstances, I should say. And it's an innate quality in all of us, and it's something that Nick and I guess, focus in on with these sorts of, where the stakes are quite high in these worlds, extreme worlds. It sort of brings out the best and worst in people.
I was wrong. We have time for one more question. I think it's this gentleman here. Hi, John.
You made a point to stress the. Just over here. You made a point to stress the fact that it was based on real events, with the fact you said that at the beginning, and then the picture at the end. And I wondered whether one character for me kind of stood out, which was Guy Pearce's character, who seemed like a caricature or a bit cartoonish. And I wondered whether he was based on a real figure, and to what extent.
Well, he's actually the real Charlie Riggs was a deputy that was more commonplace, admittedly. Although he did shoot them on the bridge and was killed by the brothers. So that part of it is all true. He was a corrupt deputy and capable, the violence we have to underplay it in the film because, one of the witnesses, the deputies, when the Moonshine conspiracy started to close in on him, one guy was shot 78 times. Other people were busted up into a million pieces. It was pretty violent times. I've had this debate over time. Jimmy Cagney, for me, was one of the greatest actors, and he was so big and yet truthful. And what we were trying to get at in Chicago, even that hairstyle comes straight from the photo. That was exactly how they cut their hair, the product they used, and they were, the mean streets of Chicago were incredible at that time. So we were trying to tap into these larger-than-life characters. If you've seen any interviews with Capone and all those sorts of characters, and Guy, was itching to do something that was that extroverted, because some of these guys, again, they're larger than life.
Fantastic. That's a good note to end it on. Thanks very much for coming. Thanks for your questions. And thanks to John Hillcoat.